Um, Today we'll continue from where we last stopped. Last week we were talking about the foundations of understanding like Azure governance, talking about Azure management group, Azure subscriptions, resource groups. We delved a little bit into those topics. And then we concluded by talking about the foundational principles of Azure billing. We touched a little bit about Azure planning, and then we talked about visibility, how important it is to be able to see what is going on with my Azure billing, what is consuming what. Right? And we talked a little bit about that last time. So in this particular Azure Hangout session, we'll continue from there. We'll talk about Azure billing and conclude it. And the two main aspects that we'll conclude it, we talk about Azure billing accountability and Azure billing optimization. How do we start holding certain functions of our organizations accountable for whatever cost that's been consumed in Azure environment? And then how can we start gaining some optimization around that, right? That will get you loved by your business, right? You go in there to be able to give them some cost savings around we can do things in a much better way and achieve, you know, same or even better results with less cost. That's always attractive if you're able to do that. So we'll touch on that. Then we'll talk about Azure monitoring and Azure diagnostics. Um, so um, understanding like so Microsoft, what they're trying to do with Azure monitoring, to give you a brief overview, they're trying to centralize it around this thing called Azure Monitor. So you go to Azure, you search for monitor as part of the services, you get this service called Azure Monitor, and they're pulling in multiple information into that. So talking about metrics, talking about activity log, talking about diagnostic logs, and we'll look at those and how those functions. Then we'll talk a little bit about something called Azure Log Analytics. So those of you that have things like OMS in the past, again, a lot of that is transforming. It's now called Azure Log Analytics, being able to take information from multiple sources, being able to centralize all those information into the Azure Log Analytics engine, and being able to gain insight out of those information using a query language that the Azure Log Analytics uses. And if we have some time at the end of that, we can talk a little bit about Azure Resource Manager. I doubt that we'll have sufficient time. It's a lot to try to cover within 1.5 hours or less than 1.5 hours. So let's get right into where we stopped, and I'll get the slides for today, and then we can proceed with that. 1 minute. So first thing I'll do is let me stop sharing this initial presentation, and let's get the one for today. Here we go. And talked about visibility already. Let's talk about accountability now. Okay. So good. Share the screen. Let's go back to this. Okay. So um, continuing from where we last stopped, talking about Azure accountability. Yeah, some of the information that we'll share. So in terms of how do you start getting accountability into your Azure environment, here are some foundational principles to know. Number one principle is use tags to add context for cost analysis. So because it's very easy, to get your report out. We saw that last week. Get report about what's consuming what within my Azure environment. But what I also want is I want some context into that. I want to be able to see what does this relate to? Is there a particular service that's using beyond what it should be using? Is there a particular application? Is it a particular environment, right? Is it like my test environment that's responsible for majority of my billing? That could be a big sign of something, all right? Is it mainly my production environment? So, and then the other thing is once you get your reporting out from the Azure platform around what's consuming what, you also want to be able to know who do I contact, who is the business owner for this. And for you to be able to do that, recommendation is whatever resources that you're deploying into Azure, add certain tags into them. So what I'll do is I'll bring up my Paint whiteboard as usual, and I'll share some information with you on some of the important tags that I'll say at a minimum have these tags enforced within your Azure environment. So that again, when you're getting your report out, you can get some context into what's consuming what within your environment. So let's go have a quick look at that. So let's get a whiteboard and let's say 4 main tags to add into your Azure environment. Number one, just enforce a tag around finance code. So that will be giving you information around what's the cost center. So whenever people are deploying an Azure virtual machine storage account, enforce them to add the cost center that should be built to, so that when you generate your reports, you can do your report based on tags, and you can get that context around this is the amount that you're going to build to this cost center within your organization. Number two is around the application. Which application is using the service that we're deploying, right? Is it your SCCM application? If you're for some reason or still hosting that and you're hosting that in Azure, is this down due to like your internal sales application that you're using? So if you're using like this kind of application, you're hosting applications in Azure, enforce that to add tags that has to do with that into your environment. Number three is adding context around the deployment environment. And that's talking about, hey, is this a production environment? Is this a dev environment? Right? First deployment to have these tags so that you can generate and see how much am I spending to do testing in my organization. You can run that based on a tag. And then finally, who is accountable? So it's a good idea to not allow people create resources except that resource has a business owner tag to it. Because at the end of the day, this is how you can begin to get some accountability into that process to be able to say, um, this is the context for that. So again, as what I was talking about, finance code, your cost center, your application context, your deployment environment, and then business owner. So I added some information here. I said tag should be enforced by configuration policies, and I'll show you a quick demo in a minute on how you can do that, how you can enforce tags using configuration policies in Azure. Um, and actually, you know what? Let's just go ahead and let me go ahead and show you that now. How do you enforce tags um, in an Azure environment? So let's see. So what I'll do is I'll go to my Azure portal. Let's go to my Azure portal over here. And is that clear enough? Can you see the screen? Is that clear? Is that not blurry? Yeah, okay. So how do we enforce tags in our environment? So to do that, I can do an Azure policy. And forgive me, I'll increase the font size to make that a bit readable. So to do that, I can go, for example, under my Azure subscription. So if I have subscriptions there, if not, I can go under services. I can go get subscriptions, and I can go select my subscription. Oh, there's really no money over here. So let me go get a better subscription. Because with that one, I really can't deploy anything. Let's get another subscription. 1 minute. Let's get another account. Portal.azure.com. Uh, okay, so hopefully this still has more money than the other one. Actually, what am I doing? Because that's the current cost, 62. Yeah, okay, I'll go ahead and use this. Okay, I'll select my subscription over here. And what I can do is I can go on the policies over here. And I can apply this at management group level, at a policy level, at a resource group level, whatever level that I want to do, I can enforce that at that level. So what I can do is that after I go under here, I can go select policy assignment. Which policy do I want to assign to this particular subscription? I can go here, I can go assign a policy. So by default, there are certain policies or the policy definitions that are included. You can create your own policy, which is what I will show you eventually, how I'm going to create my own policy. So I go over here, I select add a policy definition and I filter for tag. So I can say I can enforce the tag and its value. I can apply tag and the default value. I can apply tag its default value to a resource group. So essentially I can use one of these. I can enforce tag and its value, for example. But I'll show you this is not like the best one to use. Most likely the one that I prefer is to create my own custom one. Because what this will do again is it's going to force you to add a tag, but it's also going to force you to select a predefined value, which means as an administrator now you have to go predefine all your values and all of that. So for example, I can specify a a tag name that I can enforce. So let's say cost center, but then I have to specify a value that I want to enforce. So which is not the best one, because what you want to do is I want to enforce you to add a tag, but I want to leave the value open to you to be able to define what that value is, right? I don't want to go in to type in every single tag value, every single cost center value. I don't want to go in to type in. There may also be benefits to do that actually, because that way you can limit mistakes. But let's say for business owner, I may not want to enforce all of that. But tag value, let's say 1111222. And then once I've done that and specified that for my subscription, I go ahead and click on assign. And then it's going to assign this policy to my subscription enforce tag and its value. So what will happen is, for example, if I go try to deploy any resource into my Azure environment and storage account, for example, to my Azure subscription, if I put in a storage account name, do store 11 West Europe, I'll just leave everything at the default and I'll go ahead and review and create that. Validation passed. I go ahead and click on create. And I get an error message. It says, hey, you're trying to create a resource. Apologies for all this blocker because I'm hiding my subscription ID. I don't want to get hacked by by user. I'm hiding that, I'm masking that. But essentially what this is saying is this was disallowed by a policy. So says unfortunately that policy it's disallowing you to be able to create a resource that you've not tagged with that particular tag and that particular value. If you wanted to, you could go build your own resource tag, for example. So the one that I like doing, let me show that to you quickly because some of you may find that useful in your organization. So because I don't really like using this particular one. So what I'll do is I'll go back on the subscription and this time around I will create my own, custom policy that I can use to enforce certain tags without being like too without being having to define all the values. I just want you to ensure that you define particular tags. So what I'll do is I'll go back on the policy or policies and on the my policy assignment, I have the policy assignment here. What I can do is I can go on the policy definitions and I can create my own policy definition. So what I'll do is I'll create a new policy definition. Let's go definition location. I'm going to select my only subscription. And the name, I'm going to call this enforce governance tags. So this or enforce organization governance tags. So these are tags that I want to enforce across my organization. So this policy enforces the addition of the following tags, and I can specify. So cost center, which other one did we talk about in a slide? Let's go have a quick look. Talked about 4 of them. Cost center, application context, deployment environment, and business owner. So let's go back. So cost center, application environment or application, deployment environment, and business owner. So now I've got to specify a policy rule, which is what will define the policy. So I don't need to go create my own policy from scratch in this case. So there are certain policies that exist out on the internet. So this particular one that I'll share with you. So I'll go get this one. And I'll just take this particular policy, but then I'll make some modifications to it. So what I'll do is I'll copy this policy and I'll share this link in the description. Enforce tag match pattern for tag values. And I'll replace this. Oh, sorry, my bad. I need to go back. So if I go, so let's go back to my policy. So 1 minute here very quickly. Oh, I think I got it here. So let's go. Just want to get the right policy so I don't mess it up. Okay, got it. So I have a policy defined here and I'll just copy this policy and I'll move it over. So I'll share this with you at the end. It's in one of my notes over here. So let's go back. Okay. So I'm enforcing that category. Gonna use an existing category. I'm gonna use the general category. And what I'll do is I'll go over here. And I'm not going to be covering like policies in like full details here, so because I just want to show you what I'm doing. What I'm saying is enforce a tag called cost center, enforce a tag called environment, enforce a tag called business owner. So enforce these 3 tags, and if they are not present, deny the deployment. So that's essentially what that is doing. And then what I can do, so for example, you're looking at this match patterns there. Again, I'm not going to go into details. That's for a separate subject. What I'm saying is I'm defining what the type of values that I'm going to allow, so that somebody cannot just put in any type of value that maybe I don't want. So whenever you see a question mark here, so a question mark means character, so things like A to Z. That's like, so I want something to start with A to Z, like the first 2 character should start with that. And then I want, so whenever you see the hashtag sign, so that, or the hash sign, that's talking about numbers. So then I want it to be followed by 2 numbers, then dash 4 numbers. So essentially that's what I'm defining it. And here when you see this, that means I want 4 characters to define the environment. So maybe prod, dev, whatever. And then whenever you see the dot means any character. So essentially, I'm just defining the pattern or the value of what I'm going to accept. And I can use that and create my policy definition based on that. And then I can go to assign this policy that I just created. I can remove the existing one and let's delete assignment. And then I can go to create or assign a new policy. And this time around, when I go to select my policy definition, I'll search for org governance. So I can select that. I can select and assign that. And I can go ahead and assign this. And once I've done this, now if I go try to create a new service or create a new deployment, let's go back here. Let's now services, let's go to create a resource, storage and storage account. And now if I try to create a new storage account into my existing resource group, give it the name do store 001, and I go to review and create. It may pass the validation, but now I know I need to add certain tags. So if I go here, so actually it's not allowing me to even pass the validation because it's like, listen, this particular policy, which is the old one, right? It takes a while to pick up the policy definition, but it's saying this policy is stopping you from being able to proceed. So it takes a while. My new one is going to kick in, and then when the new one kicks in, it's going to let me know that I need to go over here and I need to add certain tag values, like the 3 that I defined, and it's going to enforce that within my environment. I hope that that makes sense to you. So let's move on to the next one because we spend a lot of time talking about just tags. But yeah, so what are the best practice when we're talking about that? So talk about adding certain tags, and I've showed you how to do that. The next best practice when it comes to Azure account or Azure billing accountability is to use budgets. So it's a very important one also. So budget what it allows you to do, it allows you to be able um, to create certain budgets against your subscription, and then assign certain groups or users or action groups within your organization to say, so for example, this subscription has a budget of £5,000. If it gets to 80%, send an email to the group and say, hey, you're 80% of your budget now. If it gets to 90%, send an email to the group's manager and say, now you're getting closer. And then if it gets to like 100%, send an email to finance to say these people have exhausted their budget and it's the beginning of the month, so that we can begin to take action. In other words, you're adding accountability to your Azure billing. And this, to me, I think this is like an amazing implementation by Microsoft and what they've done. So what I'll do is I'll go back quickly to show you how to set budget within your environment. So while I'm in the Azure portal, so if I go under cost management and billing, and if I go under cost management, so there's an issue with this one. So what I'll do is I'll go to my other subscription because that one may have billing enabled already. So it's still being rolled out across the different subscription types. So you may realize that you do not have this at the moment with your subscription type, but eventually it's going to be rolled out across. So again, I go under cost management and I have budget here. And it's amazing because what I can begin to do is I can select my subscription that I want to apply this budget to. If I wanted to, I could even go ahead and select and apply budget against a resource group. Well, I'm just going to apply that against subscription. I don't have any budget, and I can go ahead and add a new budget. And it's very simple the way it works. So I just go ahead and specify um, what's the name of this budget? Um, Maybe IT development budget. What's the amount and when does it reset? Is it a monthly amount? Is it a quarterly amount? Is it an annual amount? So let's say it's a monthly amount and they have 3,500 um, and that will be aligned to them monthly. Which date am I going to start and assigning that? Which date do I want this to expire? Then I can begin to configure alerts and based on action group. So for example, I can begin to say when it gets to 70% of the budget, which is this amount, I want you to alert an action group. So I need to create an action group first of all. So um, if I wanted to, I could go click manage action group over here. It's going to take me to the window where I can create an action group. So for example, I can create an action group and say, this is the IT team themselves. And I can specify the same short name, IT team. And I'll just leave everything in that resource group for now because we want to move very quickly. Action name, again, forgive me, I'll just use the same thing for all of that. And I say, what action type? Do I want this to be an email? Do I want this to trigger an Azure function? That was my mistake. Do I want it to trigger an Azure function to take an action based on this budget reaching this particular threshold? So what I just want to do is I want to send an email. So I select email, IT team, go ahead and specify IT team at azurehangout.com. And if I wanted to, I could put SMS, right? There's a cost to that, remember. That's carrier charges may apply. I could send a voice message, whatever I want to configure. I can configure the action that I want it to take over here. So once I've specified my action group name and my action group type, and I've created that, then I can use this within my budget when I'm specifying the threshold. So I can use that within my budget in specifying my threshold. So that's created. Right, so that's created. So I'll go ahead and close that. And when I go back here, I can select 70% alert the IT team. So I can then go ahead and say when it gets to 80%, put another action group, which would be the IT team's manager. When it gets to 95%, okay, it's time to get finance involved. Maybe when it gets to 100%, get HR involved, whatever. So that way you have accountability tied around you as your billing. So now it's not just like a free for all within your organization, right? There's a structure behind it. You're enforcing tags to begin with, number one. So let's delete that. You're enforcing tag, right? Best practice number one, you're enforcing your tags. That gives you accountability to ensure that you can run a report and say which service is consuming this. That's fine. Now you're tying some governance around that to say, let's start assigning budget and let's start getting somebody accountable for what we are spending in Azure. So let's move on to the other best practices because we have very limited time. Yeah, and number three, least privileged role-based access control roles. That's another good one that you can use. To me, like it's important because one of the things that you could do is when you start using budget, for example, most likely it's not the IT team that's going to be setting budget. Maybe you get that information from your finance people, but sometimes you can use role-based access control to delegate this. So for example, what I could do is if I go back to my environment here, I could go, let's say I go on the back to my Azure AD environment, I could go create a finance user and give and assign a limited role to my finance user where they could go into Azure, they could set budget against different resource groups and different subscriptions, and that's the only thing that they can do. So that's what that's talking about. So for example, I could come in here, I could create a new user, call this a finance user. Um, so David, okay, the Outlook dot, okay, so let's do finance user at David Kayode outlook.onmicrosoft.com. So it's just a normal user role. So let's leave it as a user role, and I'll go ahead and click on um, create a password. Okay, let's copy the password. Let's paste it here in one of my notes over here because I'll need that for later. And what I can do is I can go ahead and click on create this finance user. So finance user created. What I can do is I can go to my subscription, and I can go assign a permission to this finance user so that they could go in and create budgets because they know the budget, they know what they need to set. I'm delegating that ability to them to do that. So I can go under my subscription, I can go under access control IAM, and I can go add a new role assignment. And what's the role that I want to select? So this is where this slide is going to make sense to you. So I could use any of this role that's associated with billing in Azure. So cost management reader, they can read cost management, but no changes allowed. Yeah, finance reader, finance people need more than that. In addition to cost management reader, I can create budget and alert creation. That sounds nice to me. Cost management contributor. So I can assign this, for example, to finance manager or to finance department. That looks very great. So let's go do that. So cost management contributor is what I'm looking for. So let's go back over here and let's go get cost management contributor, right? And search the user that I want to assign this to. And I'm going to select finance user. So I know that this is not showing to you because it's blurred, but that's the finance user that I'm selecting there. I go ahead and click on save to that. And after that saved successfully, one of my role assignments that I should have should be my cost management contributor, which is my finance user. So what I could do is if I go try to log in, let's bring up a different browser now. And what I'll do is I'll go to portal.azure.com and let's go finance user at David Kayode outlook.onmicrosoft.com. Let's go next and let's go get the password. And I put the finance user password in there. Yeah, I need to change the password, so let's change the password. Sign into that. And what you see is that this user cannot do anything apart from create budgets. So let's make that bigger. So for example, if I go on the virtual machines, yeah, it's like there's no virtual machine that's showing up. Let's go on the storage account. There's no storage account showing up. Of course, I have storage accounts because I just showed you just some minutes ago that let's go back to my account here. If I go to the same account, if I go on the storage account, I have at least two storage accounts. So I have two storage accounts here, but finance user cannot see them because the role is limited that this finance user have. But what they can do, what they do have the ability to do is they can go on the cost management, right? They can go on the cost management for and billing on the cost management, and they can go there and they can set budgets. And they can add a new budget this time around. Let's say they want to set it against another subscription and they had in a new budget for the development team. Now whatever, they can set a new budget, assign the budget, set the expiration, set the alert conditions, create that's going to be successful, but that's the only thing that they can't do. I'm sorry, that they can do in that case. So let's round up on this and then move to the final one. So keys to accountability. Very important. So you want to extend visibility to stakeholders. That's the part of the alerts in terms of the budget. Right? You also want to set clear goals, in terms of what are your budget and what are your alert, and then you want people to be accountable for that. That's the place of where your action groups comes in. Okay. So moving on to the very last part of um, the four pillars, I call them, of Azure billing. The last part is optimization. We have our visibility now. Great. Sorry, we've done our planning. Great. We have our visibility. We know what we are spending. That's fine. We've done accountability. We have some governance around that with tags and budgets. Great. But now, how can we start beginning to optimize to ensure that we've not just done it once, we want to ensure that whenever there's an opportunity to save costs, we are taking advantage of that opportunity to save costs. And here's the reason for that. So let's take a back step to understand the reason for this. Typically, in a public cloud environment, there's a new challenge that we did not have before. In the past, like IT, whatever development wants to spend certain money to develop whatever, they go, with their manager, they get the budget from the business, the budget is set, they go buy the equipment that they need, and that's it. There's no, there's very little way for them to go outside the budget. But in this environment, you allow your developers to get access, right? They have their DevOps and their CI/CD pipeline. They're constantly deploying resources into the environment. They're constantly testing. They're constantly integrating code. They're constantly doing all of that. So all of a sudden, people in an organization that were not responsible for financial results, all of it, not result, result is not the right term, for financial accountability within the organization, all of a sudden they're being held accountable for, so all of a sudden they have impact on the finances of an organization. So that's a big challenge because developers, typically like DevOps people, that's not their field. And I like this particular slide. It's from a Microsoft Ignite session, but I love this slide. It talks about what do you think if you say to a developer, your workload can run in 3 VM types. It can run great on 3 VM types. This huge VM type, this medium VM type, or this large VM type. Which one do you think the developer will naturally choose? What do you think? You want to put your answer in the chat window. What do you think the developer will go for? Large, exactly. And why? Why would they go for large? Here's the reason. Because typically a developer has been held responsible for the performance of the application. So to him, it's being judged based on how good my application performs. So hey, the more resources I can give to my application, the better chance of success that I have that my application will perform very well. I don't care about cost and all of that stuff. What I'm judged on is my application performs very well, not for how cheap I can do it. So that's the reason why the developer does that. And that's in their psyche. So you must understand that. So that's the reason why, like all these governance things that we're talking about. But then we know that the finance people, when they're looking at that, they're like, oh, actually, this is not the one that would deliver more success to the business in terms of our cost optimization. But at the same time, it's not the one that's going to encourage the finance team and managers to go, man, this cost is so great. We need to move more stuff into the cloud. So what that means is that we have to have a way of understanding when there are opportunities to optimize for cost savings in the cloud, we have to have a way of doing that. And we do have a way. So when it comes to cost optimization, the way is Azure Advisor. Azure Advisor, so I won't go into the details of the other thing that it does, but on the cost side is where I'll talk about very quickly. On the cost side, Azure Advisor enabled will give you recommendations on how you can optimize your cost. It's kind of like your cost consultant in Azure. It's going to let you know. So for example, it's going to give you recommendations around right sizing. It's going to be having a look at your virtual machine and going, hey, this virtual machine is like, you're only using about 30% of what it's capable of. Maybe you want to reduce that to a smaller size. But what we want to do also in an organization is we don't want this to just be in a portal somewhere that nobody checks. We want this to be something that's proactive and continuous, where when Azure Advisor finds an opportunity to optimize cost, it goes right back to accountability, it goes to the right person that can take action on that, and they can go, hey, hello developers, I know you're very busy developing code, but hey, can we get this machine sizes to the right sizes? Because I'm getting these recommendations from Azure developer. Maybe it goes to the developers themselves. But again, you want to tie some accountability around that. It's going to let you know, for example, if you have idle resources running in Azure. There's a story that I heard which is very funny, where somebody went into their Azure environment and saw a very powerful Azure Platform as a Service SQL that's running. It's just there, it's just running. It's like, this is a very expensive Platform as a Service SQL. It's running. Is it doing anything? No, it's not doing anything. Okay, why is it running? Oh, yeah, we have a project coming up in 2 weeks. We're just spinning it up now. You're spinning up this powerful platform as a service SQL because you have a project coming in 2 weeks' time, right? So in that case, Azure Advisor could warn you and say, hey, you have a resource that's been spun up, but it's idle, it's not doing anything. And you can go, hey, why don't you spin it up 3 hours before the project time? Why do you need it 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the project time? So these are the kind of recommendations you can get. Also in Azure, there are certain cost savings that you can do with something called reserved instances. In other words, if you know that your workload is going to be stable, it's not going to be spiky, moving up and moving down, you can commit to Microsoft and say, hey, I'm going to buy this particular size of VM for the next 3 years, and you can get a whole load amount of savings from that. But Azure Advisor will let you know that, hey, you may want to, this particular workload is a pretty consistent workload. Maybe you want to do some reserved instances based on this. So just to show you very quickly where Azure Advisor is and where you can see that. So actually what I like about this is it's integrated into cost management and billing now. So you go under cost management and billing, you go under cost management, and Azure Advisor should be one of the options that you see over here, Advisor recommendations. And if you click over there, especially, um, so we're able to get recommendations for, yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, that's the the Dream Spark one. So I want a much more. So it's checking the wrong subscription. So what it's going to be doing is you can get to it from cost management and billing. You can also get to it directly if you go under All Services and search for Advisor. You can get to Azure Advisor there. And you can see it's going to be giving you other recommendations, but the one that I want to talk about is the one for cost. You know, I only have a very small environment here, but it's going to begin to give you a list of cost recommendations, um, so the optimizations that you can do. So just ensure that um, that's something that's configured and enabled for your Azure subscriptions. And once you've configured and enabled that for your Azure subscription, it's going to begin to check and it's going to begin to give you optimization options. So I think that's really it for like billing and Azure Advisor. So we've talked about the 4 pillars. Let's move on very quickly and let's talk about something else. Let's talk about Azure monitoring. Um, so Azure monitoring. Let's go to this. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to post your questions on billing in particular. Post that in the chat window, so maybe I can answer that before I move on. But let me know. Um, Anybody has any question on billing before I move to Azure Monitor now? Okay, no questions on billing. Let's go get our information around Azure Monitor. Yeah, I can see my slide for Azure Monitor. Okay, I'll just go ahead and talk about it without the slides. So I'll use more whiteboard in this case. Okay, so when we talk about Azure Monitor, let's go to whiteboard or monitoring in Azure as a whole. Number one thing that you want to know, monitoring in Azure, number one thing to know is that monitoring, it's a shared responsibility. I know that we talk, I work in the security industry. We talk about shared responsibility a lot when we talk about security in the public cloud, understanding that security is a shared responsibility. But it's the same when we talk about monitoring also. Monitoring is a shared responsibility. So, for example, you're not responsible for the hardware that you have that's running your virtual machines or your platform SQL in Azure. You're not responsible for that. Microsoft is responsible for that. Therefore, they're responsible for monitoring that. So, does that mean that there's nothing that you do when it comes to that? No, because what happens is, even though there's certain aspect that they look after, you still need visibility into that. You need visibility into what's going on with Azure, what's going on the side of Microsoft. So, for example, something is misbehaving, something is down, something is erratic, you need to be able to check to see is there something going on the Microsoft side that they've detected. So rather than you jumping in and start going, let's go do some monitoring, let's go do some diagnostics, maybe it's something on the Microsoft side that they're aware of. So where do you go for? Because again, just no monitoring is a shared responsibility when you talk about Azure in the public cloud. So one of the first thing I want to introduce you to when it comes to monitoring is this thing called Azure Status Page. So some of you already know this, you're already used to this. Some of you even have a lot set up for that, which is great. Azure Status, because this will tell you what Microsoft are monitoring on their own side for the different Azure status and let you know if something is going wrong on the Microsoft side of things. So you can have a look. So let's go have a look on that particular page. So what I'll do is I'll go back to my Azure portal over here and I'll go check out Azure status page. And this is what it looks like. It says, hey, currently all services are operating normally. Amazing. And it's going to refresh every 2 minutes. I can set well often it's going to refresh, and then it's going to give you information about the different services, virtual machines, um, in different regions. I'm very happy to see Africa is now part of the regions with South Africa West and South Africa North. Thank you, Microsoft. We have Azure Pacific and we have Europe. And you can have a look generally and see, hey, which service that I'm using, is there anything going on the Microsoft side that I need to be aware of? But one of the things is that this one is it's a bit, it's not noisy, but it's like too crowded, right? So maybe for you as an organization, maybe you're only using 5 services, but now you have to go through and see, yeah, like all these other services that you're not using to get to, oh, I use Cosmos DB and I go have a look. And then, of course, because this is showing you region per region, and maybe as an organization, you only use 2 regions, but now you have to scale through and go see which particular region am I referring to. So Microsoft has something better, but this is like an initial one, Azure Status. The something better that they have is something called Azure Service Health. So let's go back to our whiteboard and let's go put that down. Number 2 is Azure Service Health. And you can get to that very easily. Think of it as your personalized um, Azure Status dashboard. So what it's going to do, so you can see that in here also. So when I went to Azure Status, it tells me, go to your personalized dashboard. What does that mean by go to your personalized dashboard? What that's going to do is it's going to automatically sign me into Azure and it's going to take me to some this thing called Service Health. And what Service Health will do is that it will only show me status that relates to services that I'm using and the regions that I'm using, so that I don't need to wade through a lot of like crowded like options to get to what really affects me. So this is going to break it down and go, actually you're just using 2 services and you're just using 2 regions. So here are the services or the service status for the regions and the services that you're using. So it's going to narrow it down to what actually affects you. Um, so you can, so number, it does 2 things mainly, service health. 2 main things that it does. Number one thing that it does is it helps us to identify issues on the Microsoft side of things that may affect our applications. So we can see that. Number two thing that it does is it helps us to plan for scheduled Azure maintenance. So it can help us to do that. So because there are certain times that Microsoft have certain planned maintenance in an Azure region that you're using that could affect you. And Microsoft will have advisories or maybe on things that you need to do before they go ahead with that maintenance. Maybe you need to move some of your services. Maybe, so all those things, it's going to alert you to that on the planned maintenance. And we'll talk about this when we go more into monitoring, because what can happen is all this information can go straight into the Azure activity log, right? And then if you're doing some form of monitoring on the Azure activity log, you can pick up all this information on your monitoring system. So Azure activity log is going to display information that has to do with service health, and it's going to pass that information through. So actually, let me go ahead and show you Azure activity log very quickly. Activity log. And it's going to show you like every administrative task or things that happened within your organization the last 6 hours. You can limit that. If I go in the last month, and it's going to tell you what event is publishing this activity log. So there are certain times that you may see Azure Service Health is the one that publishing this. So, and it's going to highlight that to you. It's going to publish that into this log. So if you're monitoring this log and collecting information from it, you can collect your service health information straight from this log. So I have had none, so that's why I can't see anything. So Azure has been pretty stable. So nothing has been published that has to do with service health. So that's good. Okay, so that's that. The other thing that I want to talk about when it comes to monitoring and up here is Azure Monitor. So let's wipe some of the others away. Azure Monitor. And Azure Monitor has many parts to it. And actually, I'm a bit careful when talking about this because it's one of those services that it's currently in the midst of a transformation. It's currently changing a lot. Microsoft are adding a lot of new things into this particular service. It's been modified heavily. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to centralize a lot of monitoring in Azure under this component or this service called Azure Monitor. But Azure Monitor collects three types of information. Mainly, again, remember that things are changing. So don't crucify me if you go and it's like you collect five types of information now. So for example, there's a new component called service maps. That's in Azure Monitor. That's not part of what I'm talking about. But again, this finished transforming. So it collects information about something called Azure Metrics. It collects information about activity log, and it collects information around something called diagnostic logs. So these are the three core ones. There are more than that could come in now, but these are the three core ones: Azure Metrics, activity logs, diagnostic logs. So let's start very quickly with Azure Metrics. What is Azure Metrics? For example, you spin up a virtual machine in Azure. It's running on Microsoft heavily modified Hyper-V in terms of the hypervisor that's layer in Azure. What's the percentage of CPU that it's using? This information coming from the hypervisor level, not from within the virtual machine, but coming from the hypervisor level. It's like you go under VMware or you go under Hyper-V and you're able to see what's the percentage of CPU that this virtual machine is using and that and that and that. So different resources in Azure by default, you don't have to do anything to enable it. By default, they're going to spill out this thing called metrics information on our operational usage. So I'll show you an example here. Let's go to, I think I have some virtual machines running. If not, I can go to another subscription to show you. None here. So let's go to the other subscription. I definitely have some virtual machines. Yeah, so here's another one. And let's go on the virtual machines here. And here we go. Lots of virtual machines running like that. So I believe the status should be running. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on one of them because I believe that they're running. I don't think I've stopped them. And experiencing a bit of delay. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, it's finally got there. So yeah, it is running. It's not stopped. So it started. So one of the options that you get is you go down, you see this thing called metrics here. And all that information, you can see it under the individual resources, but they are also collected centrally in Azure Monitor over here. So metrics, so for example, what can I see? You can see information around this particular virtual machine. What's the CPU that it's using? What's the data disk read? What's the data disk write? And it's going to give you certain alerts. You can see that it's currently being transformed. Some particular metrics are being removed, while some are in preview. So disk read bytes, disk write in bytes, inbound flows on the network level. So those information about the operational status, percentage CPU, operational status of that Azure resource, all those information are collected in Azure Metrics. You do not need to do anything to enable them. They are just there and they are collected by default. So that, for example, I can say CPU usage on this machine. So that's called Azure Metrics. It's not only Azure like infrastructure as a service that spews out metrics. For example, storage account is an Azure platform service. Storage account also spews out its own metrics. It's a different type of metric, but it also spews out its own metric. So for example, if I scroll down and I go on the storage account, if I go on the metrics, I'll see certain metrics that will be spewed out, but they'll be different from what a virtual machine spews out. So for example, I can see metrics around use capacity, egress and ingress, transactions on that storage account. So just give you a different type of metric. And it's the same. You go to different Azure resources, spill out different kinds of metrics, but they spill out this information by default. How often is this information collected on the metrics? How often? So for example, I see percentage CPU on my virtual machine. How often does it refresh this information? By default, that happens every 1 minute, unless Microsoft documentation states otherwise. But for most of them, it's every 1 minute. It's going to collect this information and you're going to find that information in Azure Metrics. Again, remember that it's collecting this information and I said it's pushing all this information and storing them on the Azure Monitor. By default, it's going to keep the information in Azure for up to 93 days. So if I go under metrics and I go to select my resource that I want to have a look at, select my resource group, and select the resource, virtual machine, just to make it simple in this case. And I select, let's say, percentage CPU. Right? How far can I go in terms of what this is showing me? I can only go by default up to 93 days. I cannot go beyond 93 days. What that means is that if you need to keep an historical information of all these metrics, you need to move them away from monitor, move them into log analytics is a popular place to move them into. You can stream them to an event hub, for example, and use a third-party system to collect them from there. So, but by default, just be aware that it only goes back as far as 93 days is the longest that it goes as far back has. So the other thing that you could do also is that again you can take the information that metrics is spilling out, you can move it into Azure storage account. We won't go into all that details, we just want to give you like the overall information here. So that's for Azure metrics. What about the other ones that we're talking about? Let's talk about them. Azure Activity Log. What exactly is Azure Activity Log? What does it do? Let's talk about that. So Azure Activity Log is talking about administrative operations. What do we mean by that? Administrative operations. What this means is, for example, I create a new virtual machine in Azure. I delete the virtual machine. Those are administrative operations, right? Those are not operations that a user can do. Those are administrations that only an admin can do. So who did what and when did they do what they did? That is what Azure Activity Log will show you. Who created an Azure storage account? Who deleted the network interface? Who created a new storage account? Who deleted the storage account? And this information is very important because it has security purposes also. So for example, if an attacker gets a hold of one of your API keys and gets into your Azure environment, You want to be able to see who is spinning up resources in my Azure environment, who's creating all these containers, who's creating all these virtual machines. Those information about who is creating what and when, you'll find them in Azure activity logs. Again, that is all centralized under Azure Monitor. So let's go have a very, very quick look at that. So if I go under here, you can see activity log over here. And if I go under activity log, again under Azure Monitor, centralized under that, I can begin to see like somebody tried to do something that was denied. And that was probably me with my, oh, sorry, that's Azure, Microsoft Azure Policy Inside. And you can click on that information and it's going to give you in a JSON format over here what happened. Oh, let's go down here. I just need to be able to drag this. Uh, now. Okay, I'll just show you very briefly because it's not allowing me to drag it now. Let's try it again. Here we go. There we go. So you can see the log and you can see what did what alerting you to what. So for example, maybe I created a VM some time ago. I can see somebody created a policy definition. I can click on that. It's going to tell you who created that policy definition. That's my name. It's going to show you there. So actually I can remove Azure Mask for now, so that you can see that information. You can see it's like that's the email address, that's the person that initiated that action, that's exactly when they initiated the action, da 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 da. So that's what Azure Activity Log shows you. So one of the things that I should mention as a caveat to Azure Activity Log is that it shows you information for write operations, which include things like put, post, and delete. It does not show you what is going on within your resources. It only shows you what is going on within the Azure platform, administrative activities. So for example, if I create a new storage account, I will see that in Azure Activity Log. If I write a new file, a new blob into my storage account, I would not see that in Azure Activity Logs because that is not taking place from within the Azure platform. That is taking place from within the virtual machine, in which case that leads me to the third type of logs or information that's centralized in Azure Monitor, which is Azure Diagnostic Logs. So Azure Diagnostic Logs, the main thing that it shows you beyond the other two is that it shows you information, insight that's going on within a resource itself. The data about diagnostic log comes from within the resource. So what's going on within the virtual machine? So things like the events log that's within the virtual machine, maybe like the virtual machine state of the CPU consumption, who is rising what within a storage account, all those type of information are based on diagnostic logs. So different Azure resource types have different types of diagnostic logs. So for example, the kind of diagnostic logs that you get from an Azure Network Security Group or from an Azure Key Vault or from an Azure Storage account is different from the diagnostic logs that you get from within a virtual machine because again, there are different types of resources in Azure. So that's what diagnostic log shows you. The thing about diagnostic logs is that for a VM, for example, it's not enabled by default. You have to enable it and you have to install an agent within your virtual machine to be able to collect this information. So it's not like the others that, hey, it's default. Well, this one is not default. This one you need to actually go and deploy an agent and then collect this information using that agent. So let me show that to you very quickly. So if I close from this and if I go back to Azure Monitor, I have metrics. I've showed you that. I have activity log, but we can also do diagnostic log. But one thing that you notice is that if I go under diagnostic settings over here, what that allows me to do is, for example, I can go to my Azure virtual machine. For instance, where is my virtual machine? Let's try that. Okay, yeah, it's just showing me platform services there, not necessarily like my other service. So you see that, hey, it's not enabled. I can turn on diagnostics. This is not really going to install like an agent within a network interface. But if I go to my virtual machine and if I go on the one of my virtual machines, and I go under Diagnostics settings over here. It's going to show me and say, hey, it's not enabled. If you want to, you can enable it, and then you can pick the storage account where I'm going to store the information. But then because it's a Linux machine, I can specify what I want to collect from within the virtual machine. So let me get a Windows machine to show you much more better way. Let's go for on-prem server one. I think that's a Windows machine. Diagnostic settings. Um, if I go here, if I click on enable guest level monitoring, what that's going to do, be aware that what that means is that it's currently installing an agent within your Azure virtual machine, or not an agent, it's called an extension. So to be accurate, it's going to install something called an Azure extension within your virtual machine. And then once it installed it, you can now begin to use that to collect the information like the event viewer, more detailed, visibility of the resource usage from within the virtual machine. But that's what diagnostic log shows you. And one of the main differences between diagnostic logs and these other ones is that diagnostic logs is not stored by default. This is stored, I believe, for 93 days also on the Azure platform. This is stored for 93 days. This one is not stored at all. That's the reason why you realize that when I was enabling it, it asked me to specify a storage account because the information that it's collecting, I cannot just go to Azure Monitor and start seeing those information. It's going to collect all those information and store them in a storage account somewhere. And then I go to that storage account and use a tool to collect it from that storage account and now begin to do analytics on that. One of the biggest tools that people use for things like that is Azure Log Analytics. Have been talking for a very long time. We have about 20 minutes left to go. I think I'll stop. I'll pause here and I'll take questions. And then if there are no questions, I'll just talk about something else briefly and then we'll call it a day. And then we'll have an Azure Hangout session again, I believe next week. So I'll try to be more consistent this time around. So any questions at all regarding Azure monitoring and Azure billing that we've talked about today? Any thoughts or any questions? So if you want, I can unmute you. If you just put unmute in the chat window, I will unmute you and then you can speak. So I'll be happy to unmute you. That'll be great. We can have a conversation about any questions that you may have regarding the things that we've discussed so far. Yeah, nobody has a question. Everybody all good? Okay, so let me conclude then. I'll show you just some information about Azure Log Analytics and then we'll call it a day. Azure Log Analytics. Let's go. Okay, let's talk very quickly about Azure Log Analytics and then we'll call it a day. Just briefly, and I'll show you how to run just a short query language on that. Azure Log Analytics. So it used to be called OMS. For those of you that are aware of OMS, some functionalities of OMS have been distributed across, Azure Automation Account, Azure Backup. So functionalities of OMS have been distributed around to different Azure services now. But Azure Log Analytics, the whole concept around Log Analytics is you can take information from multiple sources. So the information could be Azure metrics that we can view on the Azure Monitor. The information could be Azure diagnostic logs that we are collecting using the Azure Diagnostic extension that's installed within our virtual machines, or by enabling diagnostic logs on particular Azure resources. We can collect all this information. There could be Azure activity logs. Actually, Azure Log Analytics has its own agent. They could be collected via Log Analytics agent. So Log Analytics agent is different from the diagnostic extension that's installed. It's a different agent. It's actually called the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, MMA. So that's that one. So we can collect all this information into a central place, right? So collect information from multiple sources, and the information are not just limited to Azure machines. Those information could be from machines that you're hosting on premises in AWS. You can install the log analytics agent on them and collect this information, and they go into your log analytics store. And then what you can do is that once you've collected them, you can now analyze the data. And the reason why you're analyzing data is you want to obtain certain insights. And for your analysis, you use a query language called Custo. So analyze the data using a powerful query language called Custo. So that in essence is what Azure Log Analytics allows you to do. You could also pass this information somewhere else. So for example, output into something like Power BI to create some nice visualizations of what's going on within that. Azure Log Analytics also allows you to be able to do certain visualization using graphs. We'll see just a little bit of that before we round off. So in essence, what Azure Log Analytics does is three things. Let's go back over here. We can collect information from our data sources, again from metrics, could be anything from metrics, diagnosis log, activity log, log analytics agent, Microsoft monitoring agent. You pass that into the log analytics service, and then you get an output you can analyze using the Azure Custo query language. And I particularly like this diagram from Microsoft. So what I'll do is I'll go back, bring a different whiteboard, and I'll show that to you very quickly. So that's what that looks like. Again, you get your logs collected, you pass them into the service, and then you can do queries, and then you can output that into alerts, into dashboards, into you can pull out that information using PowerShell, using API, using export, whatever you want to use, you can do that. So what I'll do is I'll just show you very quickly. I'm not sure if I have the Azure log, any information in Azure Log Analytics. But if not this one, I'll get another account where I have that enabled. So what I'll do is I'll go here and I'll go on the Log Analytics workspaces, anything enabled. So nothing enabled at the moment. Yeah, okay, let's enable something. So I go create Log Analytics workspace. This is where it's going to store the information that I'm collecting. So I give the workspace a name, Log Analytics 01, the subscription associated to that. Okay, let's call it something else. 03. Yeah, okay. Put it in a new resource group called Log Analytics RG. Location, I'll put that in West Europe, and I can select my pricing tier. I won't go into details about this for now because of time. We can cover that in more details later. So what I will do is that I will create my Log Analytics workspace. And then once I have my log analytics workspace created, I can start configuring collection of data from multiple sources. While it's creating my log analytics workspace, let me see if I can get another account where I've already enabled this, and I could show you very quickly how to construct a Custo query in log analytics once you have your data all pulled into that. So let's go to portal.azure.com, log in very quickly, into a different account. Oh, let's see. Let's do this. Let's do two-factor authentication very quickly. Yeah, okay. So I've just logged into a separate account. I'll quickly verify if I have log analytics enabled on this already. See log analytics workspaces. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's disabled though. Let's see. Let's try something. If that does not work, I will need to do this demo after creating one the next time. So I go back on the Azure Monitor, and what I can do is if I go on the logs, that's going to connect me to Azure Log Analytics where I can do my query. If it does not complain about I've run out of money on this account. Ah, nice. Okay, good. So to show you, so this is an example of a log analytics workspace where I've passed a lot of information into this. And one of the things to quickly mention so that you can understand how this works briefly is on the left-hand side, you have something they call schema on the left-hand side. So you have your schema, and what that does is it represents all the tables and all the attributes. So all the information that's coming into log analytics, they're going to be structured into different tables, right? Where you can begin to make queries on those. And you can see those tables in form of the schema on the left-hand side here. So you can see this information here. And what you can do is, for example, you can begin to query information against the table. So for example, if I go VM bound ports, run, and I'm just trying to get information out of this particular table. It says, hey, you've got no information in this table. So let's move on and see if there's another one I can. Okay, Azure Activity. Let's double click on that. And again, what I'm doing here is I'm just constructing a custom query language, trying to get information and run some analysis, get some data out. Let's keep trying to see if we get to a table that has a particular data that we can use. Okay, let's try this. Let's try perf. If perf run, any good information here? No result. Okay, last 24 hours. What about if I try last 7 days? Run. No. So I think I don't really have that much information over here, so I think I'll probably move on. But what you can begin to do is you can begin to query against the different tables. So for example, and I'll show you a proper demo of this once I have some data in log analytics the next time. So once I have that, I can double click on the table to get information and just run that and get information about what data is in this table. Then what I can begin to do is I can begin to do some filtering. So for example, let's say I'm doing performance, which is the perf one, assuming it had data in it. I could go perf and put the pipe symbol, and I can put a where condition. So I can say, show me, so perf where computer, so it's going to show you the different attributes within the table that you can begin to query against, where computer equals to computer whole one. Show me just the performance statistics for this computer. So anybody that's used like a tool like Splunk before, you'll be familiar with this type of query language. And then you can go ahead and click run against that, and then you get your result. And then once you get your result, you can even begin to delve down even more. And you can begin to say maybe where a particular attribute equals to this. from this data. You can join it, you can extend it. Again, it's very much easier to understand once I have data that I can use to show you. But that's exactly how you start using Custo. The main thing to understand is on the left hand side, you have your schema, which are the tables. You could query against the tables by just double clicking the tables to begin with, see the data in the table. Then you can begin to do certain filtering using the pipe symbol and using different types of condition to filter the data that you're looking for. And then once you have that, you can construct a chart based on that. You can pin it to a dashboard somewhere so that it runs on a schedule. And then you can go have a look and see what amount of computers in my organization have this particular characteristics or attributes in the last 24 hours. And you're going to be able to pull out that information. So essentially, that's what it does. I'll stop talking over there. If there are no questions for today, thanks very much for joining. The recording for this particular session will be in the chat window. Again, my plan is to host another Azure Hangout session, Azure Hangout 13 this time next week. The topic will be posted in the LinkedIn group. Thanks very much for joining, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful evening. If you have any questions that you want to ask me, I'll hang around. I'll unmute you. I'll stop recording now, and then we can get about 7 minutes because I've got to join another meeting, and then we can just have a chat. Thanks very much. I'll stop the recording now.